You see it everywhere, right? On cable news, all over your social media feed, maybe even at family dinners. It all seems to boil down to this one single question. Who is to blame for, well, all of this in American politics?
So who's the bad guy? Is it Trump, the Democrats, the MAGA crowd, the libs? We are just stuck in this, this endless loop of pointing fingers, totally convinced that if we could just get rid of that one group, everything would magically be fixed.
But what if I told you the real culprit isn't a person or a party? What if it's something much deeper? A huge, systemic shift that's been happening so quietly right under our noses that most of us never even saw it coming.
Okay, so to find the real answer, we've got to look beyond the daily noise, the headlines. We need to dig into a really fundamental change in how America is even governed. It's been this slow, quiet shift from a limited republic to a massive centralized state.
Think about it. The founders' original vision? It was for a government with very specific, very limited powers. Back then, Washington couldn't just levy an income tax. Most commerce was handled by the states. Now, fast forward to today, and wow, the federal government has its hands in pretty much every part of our lives: our healthcare, education, housing, even retirement. It's not just a little different, it's a completely different machine.
So how do we even begin to map a shift this big? The simple left versus right line we always hear about? It just doesn't cut it. It's too simple. A much better tool is something called the Nolan chart. It's basically a grid with two different axes, one for personal freedom and one for economic freedom. And using this, we can plot out political ideas in a way that makes a whole lot more sense.
All right, so if we use this chart, we can pinpoint where the US started out back in 1787, and it would land right in the conservative libertarian quadrant. Why? Because it was built on this idea of really high economic liberty. The government's role in the economy was supposed to be tiny. Now, it's really important to remember, by today's standards, personal liberty was, it was pretty low for a lot of people. That's some crucial historical context.
Okay, now let's jump to today. Over 200 years, America has just drifted. It's moved away from that starting point on the chart. We've drifted towards the center, maybe even into the authoritarian part of the grid. And that's a space that's all about less economic freedom and way more central control. And the key thing is, this wasn't some big, loud revolution. It was a slow, quiet drift.
And here's where it gets really interesting. People feel this. They know something's up. A whopping 62% of Americans believe the federal government is just too powerful. So we have this gut feeling that something's off, but because it all happens so gradually, we can't quite put our finger on the exact cause.
So if we all agree we've drifted into this much more centralized state, the big question is, how, right? What was the engine that powered this whole thing? Well, the answer is hiding in something you could call a hidden tax.
It all starts with what some people call the political class. And look, this isn't about Democrats or Republicans. It's a coalition that kind of operates above all that. And it works like a cycle, a loop. First, you have intellectuals who come up with justifications for more government intervention. Then, politicians use those ideas to make promises and get elected. Then, bureaucrats take over to implement and, expand those programs. And finally, the industries that get rich off of it all, they turn right around and lobby for even more. It's a perfect, self-sustaining machine for growing government power.
So, how does this giant machine pay for itself? Where does the money come from? The main tool has a fancy name, seigniorage, but we can just call it the inflation tax. It's simple, really. It's the government's power to create new money out of thin air. And every time it does that, the value of every single dollar you've worked hard to save goes down.
And the effect of this, it is absolutely staggering. I mean, just listen to this. Over the last 100 years, this hidden tax has wiped out 95% of the dollar's purchasing power. Let that sink in. This isn't a bug, it's not a mistake. It's a feature. It's the very mechanism that has paid for this massive growth of the centralized state, all without politicians having to pass huge, unpopular tax hikes.
But here's the really crucial part. This hidden tax, it doesn't hit everyone the same way, not even close. Its impact is deeply, profoundly unequal. And if you want to understand why so many people are so frustrated today, you have to understand this.
So let's just break this down. If you're wealthy, you tend to own assets, right? Things like stocks, real estate. For you, inflation can actually be a good thing. It makes the value of your assets go up. But if you're in the working or middle class, your wealth is probably tied up in a savings account and your weekly paycheck. And for you, the effect is the exact opposite. This is why your grocery bill feels like it's exploding and your paycheck feels like it's shrinking every single month. Inflation absolutely hammers savings and wages that just can't keep pace.
So what's the bottom line here? It's pretty stark. Inflation is, in practice, a quiet and constant transfer of wealth. It moves money from the bottom of the economic ladder straight to the top. It widens that gap between those who own assets and those who earn a wage. And all that economic stress it creates, that's what often gets funneled into all the partisan anger we see everywhere.
Which brings us right back to where we started. Who's to blame? Well, maybe the answer isn't to find someone else to point the finger at. Maybe the first and most important step is to just get some clarity. You know, there's a really powerful idea that says seeing clearly is the first act of freedom. It means that before we can even think about fixing a problem, we first have to see it for what it really is. To see past all the partisan shouting, we have to understand the system that we're actually, truly living in.
And that, right there, is the real takeaway. This enormous change in how America is governed, it didn't happen because of some secret conspiracy or some cartoon villain. No, it happened through something much simpler, our collective habits of inattention. We just weren't paying close enough attention, and we allowed this slow drift of power to happen right under our noses.
So in the end, the question isn't just who's to blame. The real question is this: now that you can see the system, now that you understand the hidden mechanics, where do you stand? Because understanding all this, that's just the first step. What comes next? Well, that's up to all of us.